The map of the Northern Territories was a masterpiece of cartography, detailing every ridge, river, and shadow-haunted forest. King Wulfric of the Moonwood Pack had been staring at it for 17 minutes, his focus absolute. He was tracking the reported movements of Stone Fang marauders, calculating supply lines, and formulating 3 separate counter-strategies. He was a king, and this was his duty. His mind was a fortress of logic and order. Her left earlobe, a voice screamed internally. A voice that sounded suspiciously like his own, but with the volume knob broken off. Is a poem written by the moon goddess herself. A tiny, perfect swirl of cosmic artistry. Do you think she would notice if we wrote a sonnet about it? We could call it Ode to the Cartilage of Celestial Delight. Wulfric's eye did not twitch. His jaw did not clench. Outwardly, he was the stone-carved image of a monarch deep in thought. Inside, he was pleading with a lunatic. We are trying to prevent a border war. A worthy cause, the wolf agreed with thunderous enthusiasm, but one that will be significantly improved by ensuring our mate is aware of our profound admiration for her auricular structure. It is a matter of pack morale. Her morale, which is our morale. It's simple logistics, really. You're thinking about troop deployments along the Whisperwood border, a soft voice said from beside him. Wren, his mate. She leaned against the great oak table, her presence a quiet warmth that simultaneously calmed him and sent his internal monologue into a frenzy. And you're wondering if a flanking maneuver through the Greyfang Pass is too predictable. Wulfric gave a slight, dignified nod. The Stonefang Alpha is cunning. Predictability is a death sentence. She smiled, a small, secret curve of her lips that did terrible, wonderful things to his composure. He is, she agreed. Then she tilted her head, her gaze distant for a second as she listened to a broadcast only she could hear. Your wolf, however, is trying to decide if the shade of gold in your hair, caught in this specific shaft of morning light, is more sun-drenched honey or molten treasure. He's leaning toward molten treasure. He also wants to know if you'd let him roll in that particularly glorious mud puddle by the stables. She hears us, his wolf howled with glee. She appreciates our poetic soul. Mate, mate, mate! The puddle is exquisitely muddy today, a vintage mud. Wulfric's soul shriveled into a tiny, dry raisin of pure mortification. He stared at Wren. Since their mating bond had fully snapped into place a few months ago, she'd developed this terrifying, unnerving, and utterly miraculous ability. She didn't just feel his emotions, as was common. She heard his thoughts. Both sets. She could somehow distinguish between the disciplined, measured thoughts of Wulfric the king and the chaotic, effervescent, and frankly idiotic stream of consciousness that belonged to his wolf. He hadn't even known they were separate channels until she'd pointed it out. Now he lived in a state of perpetual, low-grade horror. He also thinks, Wren continued, her eyes twinkling with catastrophic mischief, that the concept of a border is an affront to the universal brotherhood of squirrels. They deserve to roam free, down with arbitrary lines on maps, up with acorns for all. Wulfric closed his eyes for a brief, agonizing moment. You are the alpha wolf of the most powerful pack on the continent. Try to have a sliver of dignity. Dignity is for those without a mate whose laughter sounds like wind chimes, the wolf retorted smugly. We have our priorities in order. You are the one obsessing over dirt paths and angry neighbors. Wren reached out, her fingers warm as she gently scratched the spot just behind Wulfric's ear. An involuntary shudder of pure bliss went through him. His entire body went lax, and a low, rumbling sound started deep in his chest. A purr. He was purring. Like a house cat. A king. Purring. He snapped back to attention, straightening up, his face a mask of iron control. The purr died with a strangled cough. Wren's hand dropped, but her smile widened. She looked at him, but her next words were projected through their bond, a warm current of affection aimed not at him, but past him, at the frantic, adoring creature sharing his skull. That was a good purr, she sent, deep and resonant, a quality effort. Wulfric could feel his wolf preening, puffing up its chest with pride. She likes our purr. We have the best purr. We should purr for her again, louder this time. I am standing right here, Wulfric said, his voice dangerously quiet. Wren's gaze met his. Her expression was soft, not mocking, not teasing, just warm. I know, she said quietly. And then she smiled. It was the smile, the one that had been slowly, methodically destroying him for weeks. Not the polite, measured smile she gave him when he made a good point in council. Not the respectful smile of a mate acknowledging her alpha. This was something else entirely, something unguarded and luminous and slightly wondering, as if she was seeing something precious that might vanish if she looked at it too directly. She only ever smiled like that when the wolf came through, when the purr escaped, or the poetry leaked out, or the carefully constructed fortress of his dignity crumbled just enough to let something honest through. She smiled like that at the wolf. She smiled at the king with respect. And Wulfric, who had spent his entire life building the king, was losing his mind. His wolf, naturally, was insufferable about it. She smiles at us like we hung the moon. Because we did. Emotionally speaking, we are her moon. You are her tax report, a necessary but uninspiring document. We are the same person, Wulfric ground out in the privacy of his own head. And yet, the wolf replied, the smugness radiating from the thought so potent it was practically a physical force. And yet, he was losing a battle for his own mate's affection against himself. And the worst part? His opponent was an idiot. A lovable, devoted, ridiculously charming idiot who currently wanted to go roll in the mud. Wulfric looked from Wren's luminous face to the offending puddle gleaming in the courtyard outside. He had never felt less like a king in his entire life. Dawn came with a cold, clean bite to the air, and the pack gathered in the courtyard for the morning run. Shifting was not optional. Not long-term, anyway. A wolf who didn't run started to feel it in their bones. A restlessness that settled behind the eyes, a wrongness in the skin, an irritability that couldn't be named. The Moonwood pack ran every morning. It was as routine as breakfast, and considerably more necessary. Wulfric shifted with the easy discipline of a wolf who had been doing this his entire life. One breath he was a king, standing in the gray pre-dawn light, and the next he was something older and simpler, a massive, dark-furred wolf with gold eyes and the quiet authority of an apex predator. He shook himself once, settling into the form, and padded to the head of the formation. The forest opened ahead of them, and they ran. It was the best part of his day, and the worst. The best because in wolf form, the world was reduced to essentials. The earth under his paws, the cold air in his lungs, the pack moving behind him in a rhythm as old as the mountains. The worst because his wolf, freed from the constraints of council chambers and formal speech, became even more insufferable. Wren ran 3 lengths behind him, her wolf quick and precise in its movements, economical where his was powerful. She read the trail without breaking stride, cataloging scent, wind direction, the age of a fox track crossing their path, in the way that other wolves breathed. It was instinct refined into art. His wolf noticed. His wolf always noticed. He broke formation. It wasn't subtle. The alpha king of the Moonwood pack, who was supposed to be leading the run with dignified authority, suddenly veered left and fell into step beside Wren's wolf, matching her stride for stride. He bumped her shoulder, lightly, playfully, the wolf equivalent of a man nudging the woman next to him and saying, "Look how fast I am. Are you looking? Look." Behind them, Marcus, a broad, gray-furred wolf with a perpetually tired expression that somehow translated perfectly from human to wolf, let out a low huff that, in any language, meant, "Oh, for the love of the ancestors." Wren's wolf did not acknowledge the shoulder bump. She did not speed up. She did not slow down. She simply angled her path so that Wulfric, still trotting alongside her with the desperate energy of a puppy trying to impress, had to navigate a patch of thorns. He hit the thorns at full stride. The yelp was undignified. This did not deter him. 3 strides later, he was back at her flank. He found a long, clear downhill stretch and accelerated, a dark blur of muscle and misplaced pride, pouring on speed that was frankly excessive for a morning jog. He cleared the stretch a full 10 lengths ahead of the pack and skidded to a halt at the bottom, turning to look back up the hill with an expression that, on a human face, would have been, "Did you see that?" Wren trotted past him without breaking stride. She did not look at him. She did not slow down. Her tail, however, gave a single, almost imperceptible wag. His wolf registered this as a standing ovation. The pack ran on. The sun rose, burning the mist off the ridgeline and turning the forest floor to copper and gold. And somewhere in the chaotic tangle of Wulfric's wolf brain, a thought formed that was pure feeling, no words. Happy. Here. Her. Happy. The armory smelled of oil and cold steel. Wulfric ran a critical thumb along the edge of a new blade, testing its keenness, while Marcus leaned against a weapon rack and watched him with the expression of a man waiting for a confession. "The smiths have outdone themselves," Marcus noted, holding a sword up to the light. "These will serve us well if the Stonefang dogs decide to get brave." "They are getting brave," Wulfric said, his voice grim. "Scouts report another raid on a northern shepherd's outpost. They took livestock, but they burned the cottage. It was a message. A message that they are terrible people who do not appreciate the sanctity of a good nap," his wolf interjected. "Wren is napping right now. We should go and stand guard outside her door. We could stand very still, like a statue. A handsome, vigilant statue. She would be so impressed by our dedication to her sleep." "We are discussing an imminent threat to our borders," Wulfric thought, frustration making the words sharp. "And I am discussing an imminent threat to our mate's REM cycle, which is more important. Do not answer. That was a rhetorical question designed to highlight your flawed priorities." Wulfric sighed, the sound escaping before he could stop it. Marcus shot him a look, one eyebrow raised. "Everything all right, Wolf? You look like you're arguing with a fence post." "Something like that," Wulfric muttered. Just then, Wren entered the armory, carrying a small tray with 2 steaming mugs. The scent of hot, spiced cider filled the air, a warm, comforting aroma that immediately sent his wolf into a tailspin of domestic bliss. "She brought us cider! She is the most thoughtful, wonderful, perfect mate in the history of mates. Our heart is a drum solo of pure joy." "I thought you two might need something to warm you up," she said, her smile gentle. She handed a mug to Marcus, then turned to Wulfric. As she passed him his, her fingers brushed against his. It was nothing, a fleeting accidental touch. It was everything. A jolt, warm and electric, shot up his arm. The deepest part of him seized upon the sensation with rapturous delight, flooding his body with a wave of pure, unadulterated contentment. Before his conscious mind could mount a defense, the sound started again. That low, vibrating rumble emanating from his chest, the purr. It was louder this time, unmistakable. Wulfric froze, mug halfway to his lips. His eyes, wide with horror, darted to Marcus. His beta had stopped mid-sip, his own mug hovering. He stared at Wulfric, his expression a perfect, beautiful blend of disbelief and dawning, rapturous amusement. "Wolf," Marcus said slowly, his voice laced with a dangerous tremor of suppressed laughter. "Did you just purr?" "Yes," the wolf yelled proudly. "It was a magnificent purr. A+ rumbling." Wulfric wanted the ground to open up and swallow him whole. He wanted to be anywhere else on the planet. He could feel the heat climbing his neck, a furious, helpless blush. He tried to speak, to deny it, to say he'd swallowed wrong, but all that came out was a strangled squeak. Wren set down her own mug and moved to his side. She didn't laugh. She didn't tease. She simply rested her hand on his arm, a small, steadying touch, and through the bond she sent a wave of quiet warmth aimed at the whole of him. "It's all right. I liked it." His wolf basked in the reassurance, like a cat in a sunbeam. "She liked it. She liked our purr. We are validated, artistically and romantically." Marcus finally lost his battle for composure. He set his mug down with a clatter, braced his hands on his knees, and howled with laughter. Not a wolf howl, but a deep, rolling, human laugh that echoed off the stone walls and weapon racks. Tears streamed down his face. "Oh, by the ancestors," he gasped, wiping his eyes. "The mighty Alpha King, the stone-faced strategist. And he purrs like a kitten when his mate touches him." He looked at Wulfric, his eyes shining with pure, unholy glee. "This is the greatest day of my life." Wulfric stood there, utterly defeated, while his best friend laughed himself sick, and his mate quietly encouraged the maniac in his head. He was the most powerful wolf in the land, and he had absolutely no control over anything that truly mattered. He made a decision. A desperate, foolish decision. He had to win her back. The man had to beat the wolf. He would launch a campaign of strategic courtship. He would buy her gifts. He would be the perfect, attentive, human mate. He would show her that logic and reason could be just as romantic as whatever it was his wolf did. It was a terrible plan. He knew it was a terrible plan, but it was the only one he had. Wren sat in the sun-drenched library, a thick tome on ancient pack treaties open in her lap. She wasn't reading it. She was listening. The library was her favorite place in the keep. It was quiet, filled with the comforting scent of old paper and leather. And it was far enough from the war room that Wulfric's king thoughts were a muted hum, like distant thunder. His wolf's thoughts, however, were a constant, chaotic broadcast, a radio station permanently stuck on a mix of love songs and stand-up comedy. Observation. The dust motes dancing in the sunbeam are not as sparkly as her eyes. Her own wolf, Fen, commented from the quiet depths of her mind. Fen's voice was a stark contrast to Wulfric's wolf's operatic pronouncements. It was a deadpan monotone, devoid of inflection, which somehow made its observations all the more potent. Wren smiled to herself. "That's almost poetic, Fen." "It is a statement of fact." His internal monologue is a cascade of such observations. It is inefficient, but the sentiment is not inaccurate. His devotion is thorough. Wren's smile softened. Thorough was one word for it. Wulfric's wolf was a relentless, 24-hour-a-day praise machine. It loved everything about her. It loved the way she tucked her hair behind her ear, the way she hummed when she was concentrating, the scar on her right knee from a childhood fall. It was overwhelming, absurd, and the most cherished thing she had ever known. Because for most of her life, she had been invisible. Growing up as the orphaned ward of a minor beta in the Shadowcrest pack, she had learned to make herself small, to take up no space, to expect no attention. She was plain. Her wolf was quiet. And she had no political connections. She was just Wren. Easy to overlook, easy to forget. That was her wound, a hollow ache of being perpetually unseen. But invisibility, she'd discovered, had its uses. When no one sees you, you see everything. She had spent her childhood watching rooms, people, the way a conversation shifted when someone was lying, the way a scent trail told a story if you bothered to read it. By the time she was old enough to join the Scouts, she was already the best tracker in Shadowcrest. By the time she was 20, she was the best in any pack she'd visited. She could follow a rogue wolf through rain-soaked forest 3 days after it passed. She could read a broken twig, a displaced stone, a scent layered under 3 others, and tell you who had walked there, how fast, and whether they were afraid. The thing that made her invisible had also made her indispensable. It was an irony she carried quietly, like a smooth stone in her pocket. Then Wulfric had crashed into her life. At a formal pack gathering, he had been striding through the crowd, an intimidating figure of pure authority, and he had simply stopped dead in front of her. The Alpha King, who everyone else saw as a demigod of power and control, had looked at her, and his wolf had screamed a single, glorious, panicked word that had hit her through the nascent bond like a physical blow. Mine. In that one moment, she had never felt more seen in her entire life. And as the bond settled, she'd discovered the wonderful, hilarious truth. The stoic, formidable King Wulfric was only half the story. The other half was a messy, emotional, deeply affectionate creature who felt everything at maximum volume. The wolf was the heart he kept so carefully guarded. She wasn't playing a game. She wasn't trying to manipulate him or push him toward anything. She just couldn't help it. When the fortress came down, when the purr escaped, or the wolf's adoration leaked through, or Wulfric forgot for one blessed second to be the king and was just a man standing in the wreckage of his own dignity, something in her chest unlocked. A warmth she couldn't contain. A smile she couldn't control. She loved him in his crown and his composure, she did. But the moments when the armor cracked and the real, messy, feeling creature underneath showed through, those were the moments that made her breath catch. Those were the moments that made the hollow ache of a lifetime of invisibility go quiet. She knew he noticed the difference. She knew it was driving him slowly insane. She wished she could explain it, that it wasn't preference, it was recognition. That the wolf didn't love her better than the man did, it just loved her louder. And for a woman who had spent 20 years being unseen, loud was a miracle. But she didn't know how to say that without it sounding like a demand. So she just smiled and hoped he'd figure it out. The eastern edge of pack territory smelled wrong. Wren had caught it 2 days ago on the morning run, a thread of unfamiliar scent woven through the familiar tapestry of Moonwood Forest. Foreign wolves, moving carefully, avoiding the patrol routes. She shifted at the tree line, alone. In wolf form, the world exploded into a cathedral of scent. The rain from yesterday, layered over pine resin and cold stone. Rabbit, recent, terrified. A fox had been through. And under all of it, faint but persistent, 3 wolves. 1 male, heavy, favoring his right hind. 1 female, smaller, anxious, her scent sharp with a cortisol edge that spoke of weeks, not hours, of fear. And a 3rd, younger, lighter on the ground, a juvenile. Wren's wolf moved through the forest like water through rock, silent, unhurried, reading the trail with the patience of someone turning pages. Here the injured one had rested, a depression in the pine needles, a trace of blood, old, scabbed. There the female had circled back to check their path, careful, protective, not a raiding party, a family. She found them sheltering in a shallow ravine 2 miles inside the border. The male was lying on his side, his hind legs swollen and poorly set. The female stood over him, her hackles raised, teeth bared. The juvenile pressed against the rock wall behind them, trying to be small. Wren shifted back and approached in human form, hands visible, voice low. "I'm Wren, Moonwood Pack. You're on our territory, but you're not in trouble." The female didn't lower her hackles, but she didn't lunge either. Her eyes were intelligent, exhausted, and fiercely calculating the odds. "Your mate's leg needs setting properly," Wren said, crouching to their level. "We have a healer at the pack house. A meal and a night's rest. You can move on when he can walk without making it worse." It took 20 minutes and a patience born of a lifetime of being underestimated before the female finally shifted back. Her name was Darcy. They'd been packless for 4 months. The story was familiar and grim. A dissolving pack, a power struggle, a family that chose to leave rather than be caught in the middle. Wren walked them back to the Eastern Patrol Post, sent word ahead, and made sure they were fed before she filed her report. She delivered it to Wulfric in the war room an hour later. Calm, professional, specific. 3 packless wolves on the eastern ridge. Mated pair, 1 juvenile. They'd been inside our borders for 2 days, avoiding patrols. I've brought them in for medical attention and a meal. They'll move on tomorrow or the next day, depending on the male's leg. Wulfric nodded, his expression one of genuine respect. Good call. If the patrol had found them first, they would have responded as a threat. Which is why I went alone, Ren finished. She is a genius, his wolf screamed internally. A tracking goddess. Her nose is a national treasure. Did you see how she just handled that? The competence, the composure. We are married to the most capable wolf on the continent, and we do not deserve her. Wulfric's face remained a mask of kingly approval. I'll inform the border patrols. Well done, Ren. She gave a slight nod and left. Professional, efficient. A scout reporting to her alpha. Through the bond, Fen murmured, His wolf is currently composing an ode to your sense of smell. It is extensive. Ren bit the inside of her cheek to keep from smiling. A soft cough drew Ren's attention from her book. Wulfric stood in the doorway of the library, looking profoundly uncomfortable. He was holding a velvet-wrapped box. He has a box, his wolf shrieked. A strategically procured offering. Phase 1 of operation. Prove the boring one is also romantic. It is a flawed premise, but the box is a nice touch. Is it meat? I hope it's meat. Ren, Wulfric said, his voice stiff. He walked toward her, holding the box out as if it might explode. A gift. For you. She closed her book, her expression carefully neutral, though she could feel Fen's quiet curiosity. The box does not smell of meat, Fen observed dryly. Ren took the box. It was heavy. Wulfric, you didn't have to. I appreciate it. It is a token of my esteem, he said, the words sounding like they'd been memorized from a textbook. Esteem, the wolf wailed. We adore her. We worship the ground she walks on. We would fight the moon for her. Esteem is what you have for a well-made boot. You are ruining this. Ren lifted the lid. Inside, nestled on a bed of silk, was a necklace. It was exquisite, a silver chain holding a single, flawless sapphire that shimmered like a captured piece of the twilight sky. It was a king's gift. It was beautiful. It was formal. It was empty. It's beautiful, she said, and her voice was honest. It was a stunning piece of jewelry. But it felt like it had been chosen by a committee. It was a gift from the crown, not from the heart. The stone matches your eyes, Wulfric stated, as if presenting evidence in a trial. We said that, the wolf yelled. 3 days ago, he stole our line. Plagiarism! Ren smiled, a gentle, sad smile. She set the box aside. Thank you, Wulfric. It's lovely. She saw the flicker of disappointment in his eyes. He'd expected more. He'd wanted his grand, strategic gesture to work. She stood up, closing the distance between them, and wrapped her arms around him. A hug. Simple, warm, genuine. Thank you, she said into his chest. Really. He stood rigid for a moment, a statue of royal dignity receiving an embrace, and then, slowly, his arms came up around her. She pressed her cheek against his heartbeat and felt the tension in him begin, reluctantly, to ease. And then her hand drifted up, almost absently, to the base of his neck. Her fingers found the thick, warm muscle just below his ear, and she scratched, gently, instinctively, the way you'd comfort something beloved without thinking about it. He froze. His eyes fluttered shut. For a second she felt the battle raging inside him, the king screaming for decorum, the wolf screaming for more. The wolf won. A low, rumbling purr started in his chest, a vibration she could feel through the soles of her feet. It was a sound of pure, helpless bliss. His shoulders slumped. His head tilted instinctively into her touch, giving her better access. The sapphire necklace, the velvet box, the carefully planned gesture, all of it dissolved. He was just a man, purring in his mate's arms, undone by the lightest scratch. She looked up at him, and there it was again, That smile, the luminous one, the one that said she was seeing something precious and fragile and impossibly dear. The necklace had earned her gratitude. The purr earned that smile. Wulfric felt the difference like a knife. He didn't understand it. He couldn't name it. But he felt it, the gap between what he'd planned and what she actually wanted. And it was an abyss he had no strategy for crossing. She pulled back gently, touched his cheek once, and left him standing there in the quiet library, with the necklace and a growing, bewildered ache in his chest. He found Marcus in the corridor an hour later, still stewing. "I gave her a sapphire," he said, his voice the particular shade of aggrieved that only a man who has done everything right and gotten it completely wrong can produce. "It cost more than your house." Marcus leaned against the wall and crossed his arms. "And?" "She thanked me. She hugged me. She was kind. And then I purred, and I cannot say the rest." He stopped, swallowed. "She smiled. Differently. The way she only smiles when—" He couldn't finish the sentence. He didn't know what he was trying to say. Marcus, infuriatingly, seemed to know exactly what he was trying to say. "When you stop being the king for 5 seconds. Wulfric's head snapped toward him. "What is that supposed to mean?" "It means I've known you since we were pups." Marcus's voice was unusually serious. "I watched you bury your father and become alpha in the same afternoon. I watched you build this pack into something that would make the ancestors weep with pride. You are the best king I have ever served. But Wolf, she doesn't need a king. She's already got one. The whole continent's got one. What she doesn't have, what nobody has, is the version of you that composes terrible poetry about earlobes and wants to roll in puddles." "That version is an idiot," Wulfric said flatly. "That version is honest. You know what your wolf does that you don't. He doesn't plan how to love her. He just does it. No strategy, no gift-wrapped boxes. He sees her, and every single thing he feels comes out sideways and loud and ridiculous. And she doesn't smile at that because she prefers it. She smiles because she can tell it's real." Marcus shook his head. "You strategize your affection like it's a military campaign, Wolf. She doesn't want a general. She wants someone who rolls in mud puddles." Wulfric stared at him for a long, hard moment. "That is the stupidest thing you've ever said." Marcus shrugged. "And yet." The words landed like a stone in still water. Wulfric heard the echo, the wolf's own smug reply from days ago. Those same 2 words, carrying the same maddening, undeniable weight. He opened his mouth to argue, found nothing to say, and walked away in dignified, strategic retreat. The Royal Council chamber was designed for intimidation. Carved stone wolves glared down from the vaulted ceiling, their snarling faces a reminder of the pack's strength. A massive circular table made from a single petrified ironwood tree dominated the room, its surface scarred with the history of 1,000 grim decisions. It was a place for kings and alphas, not for purring. Wulfric sat at the head of the table, the picture of regal authority. His face was granite, his posture was iron. He was flanked by Marcus, who still occasionally shot him a look of pure, unadulterated mirth before schooling his features back into a mask of beta-level seriousness. Ren stood at the map table, presenting her report on the eastern border, the packless family, the patrol gaps she'd identified, her recommended adjustments to the scouting rotation. Her voice was calm and specific, her observations precise. She traced the patrol routes on the map with a sureness that spoke of years spent in the field, pointing out where the coverage thinned at the confluence of 2 river valleys, and how the prevailing winds created a scent shadow that a careful wolf could exploit. Elder Maeve, a she-wolf whose face was a roadmap of 100 harsh winters, listened with sharp attention and nodded twice, which from Maeve was the equivalent of a standing ovation. The other council members were leaning in, following Ren's finger on the map. Even old Aldrich, who had been on the council since Wulfric's father's time, was paying attention instead of napping. Wulfric tried to listen. He really did. The strategic implications were significant. The patrol gaps were real. He should have been formulating responses and allocating resources. "She is so commanding," his wolf observed with reverent awe. Look at how she points at the map. The authority, the precision. Her fingers are like tiny generals directing operations. We should write an epic ballad about her competence. Her eyelashes, a study in shadow and light, Volume 2. Her pointing finger, a masterclass in cartographic dominance. He forced himself to focus. The eastern ridge, the scent shadow, the patrol rotation. And the way her brow furrows when she's making a tactical point. It is the most attractive furrow in the history of brows. A furrow of devastating intellectual beauty. We should... The eastern ridge. Tell her we love her furrow. Wren finished her report. I'd recommend doubling the eastern patrols for the next 2 weeks. If one packless family found the gap, others will. And not all of them will be families. Elder Maeve snorted approvingly. Sound reasoning, better than the last 3 reports from the Eastern Scouts combined. She looked at Wulfric. Your mate has a better nose than half your military, Alpha. Wulfric opened his mouth to respond. Something dignified, something kingly. Something that acknowledged his mate's competence in a formal, council-appropriate manner. Wren glanced at him as she sat down, and their eyes met. A shared flicker of warmth, of understanding, of silent, perfect connection. And the deepest part of him, the part that tracked her scent before he entered a room, the part that knew her heartbeat in a crowd, moved before his conscious mind caught up. It wasn't a decision. It wasn't the wolf taking over. It was him, all of him, the animal and the man, the instinct and the intellect, reaching for the person who made both halves make sense. He leaned sideways, buried his face in the curve of Wren's neck, and took a deep, shuddering breath. The world stopped. Every conversation in the room died. Every head turned. The only sound was the crackling of the fire in the great hearth. Wulfric was frozen, his nose pressed against the warm, soft skin of his mate's throat, inhaling the scent of lavender and cold rain that was uniquely hers. His mind was a white-hot blank of pure, undiluted panic. Oh, his wolf said, sounding surprised at its own audacity. Well, that happened. Her skin is so soft. Mission accomplished. Time seemed to stretch into an eternity. He could feel the shocked stares of his entire council like physical blows. He could feel Marcus's silent, vibrating seizure of laughter beside him. Slowly, as if moving through tar, he pulled back. He straightened in his chair. He did not look at anyone. He stared at a knot in the wood of the table in front of him, as if it held the secrets to the universe. He could feel a flush of such intense heat on his face, he was surprised the table didn't start to smoke. Wren, to her eternal credit, did not flinch. She simply reached up and smoothed her dress where he had wrinkled it. Then she rested her hand, very briefly, on the back of his neck. A touch so light it could have been accidental. Through the bond, she sent nothing pointed, nothing teasing. Just warmth. A steady, quiet pulse of, "It's all right," that cut through the panic like sunlight through fog. Through the bond, Fenn's voice was a dry, cool whisper. That was a public declaration of ownership. Unconventional for a formal council meeting, but the message was clear. We own her. Wulfric's wolf puffed up, having already recovered. I mean, she owns us. It's mutual. But yes, everyone saw. They all know. Elder Maeve regarded him for a long, unreadable moment. Then the corner of her ancient mouth twitched, and she turned back to the agenda as if the Alpha King had not just nuzzled his mate like a lovesick puppy in the middle of a security briefing. Beside Wulfric, Marcus Thorne quietly and methodically pounded his forehead against the council table, his shoulders shaking with silent, agonized laughter. He ran. As soon as the council adjourned, and it adjourned very quickly because no one could look at him, Wulfric shifted in the courtyard and bolted for the forest. He ran hard, the cold air burning in his lungs, the ground a blur beneath his paws. He ran until the keep was a distant smudge on the horizon, and the only sound was his own breathing and the wind through the pines. He stopped at a ridge overlooking the valley. The packlands stretched below him, vast and green, threaded with silver rivers. In wolf form, the humiliation should have faded. The world was simpler here. Scent, sound, the solid earth, the cold bite of the wind carrying pine and distant rain. The steady drum of his own heart, slowing now, the run doing what it was supposed to do. But his wolf wasn't humiliated. His wolf was replaying the nuzzle with a connoisseur's appreciation. The warmth of her skin, the catch in her breath, the way her scent had spiked, not with anger or embarrassment, but with something warmer, something she'd tried to hide. She wasn't angry, his wolf observed, the usual bluster gone, replaced by something quieter and more perceptive than Wulfric usually gave it credit for. She never is. She was tender. You keep missing that. Wulfric stood on the ridge, the evening wind ruffling his fur, and for the first time, he didn't fight the thought. He let it sit. You keep missing that. He thought about the morning run, the way she'd angled him into the thorns, and the single wag of her tail when he came back anyway. He thought about the cider in the armory, how she'd known they were cold before they did, how she moved through the pack with a quiet attention that most people mistook for shyness, but was actually something far more precise. He thought about her tracking report, the calm authority, the way she'd identified the Packless family as a family, not a threat, because she knew what it meant to be overlooked and hungry and afraid. Marcus's voice echoed through his mind. He doesn't plan how to love her, he just does it. And Wren's sad smile when she'd set the sapphire aside. Not angry, just unseen. Somehow, impossibly still unseen, even by the man whose wolf screamed her name at maximum volume 24 hours a day. He shifted back, the brief disorientation washing through him like cold water. He stood on the ridge in the fading light, and for the first time, he didn't feel like the wolf was his enemy. He felt like the wolf might be the only honest part of him. He found her on the high stone balcony overlooking the valley, the first stars just beginning to prick the deep violet sky. She stood with her hands on the railing, her face turned to the wind, and he realized with a pang that this was how she looked when she thought no one was watching. Quiet, still, perfectly, deliberately small. He stood beside her and said nothing. For once, his wolf was silent too, as if it understood that this moment required a different kind of attention. She spoke first, her voice soft in the twilight. I grew up in the Shadowcrest pack, you know that. But I don't think you know what it was actually like. She paused. My parents died in a rogue attack when I was a pup. I was raised by a distant cousin of my mother's. He was a good man, but he had 4 pups of his own. His mate was always tired. It was a full house. Wulfric stood beside her, his own turmoil momentarily silenced by the unexpected turn. He simply listened. I learned to be quiet, she continued, her gaze fixed on the horizon. To be helpful. To not be a burden. I was good at it, so good that most of the time, people forgot I was there. I'd be sitting in a room, and they'd talk as if it were empty. Not out of cruelty, they just didn't see me. He felt a pang in his chest, a sharp echo of her old pain through the bond. I turned it into something useful, she said, and there was no self-pity in her voice, only a quiet precision. The tracking, the reading of scent and sign, you learn to notice everything when nobody notices you. But the thing underneath it, the wanting to be seen, that doesn't go away just because you found a skill to hang it on. She stopped there. She didn't explain what it meant. She didn't connect it to the purring or the wolf or the smile she couldn't control. She just stood in the twilight, having offered the truest thing about herself, and waited. She feels invisible, his wolf whispered, the usual all-caps bluster gone, replaced by a quiet, aching sorrow. Like we did, in the castle. After Father died, everyone saw the new alpha. No one saw the scared little boy. And then, like a map he'd been staring at for weeks that suddenly resolved into meaning, Wulfric understood. The smile. The luminous one that haunted him. The one he'd been agonizing over for weeks. It wasn't preference. It was recognition. When the wolf came through, when the purr escaped or the poetry leaked out or his carefully constructed dignity collapsed, in those moments, He wasn't performing. He wasn't being the king or the alpha or the stone-carved image of a monarch. He was just a man who loved her so much it came out sideways and loud and ridiculous. And for a woman who had spent her entire life being invisible, that unguarded, unstrategic, helplessly honest love was the first thing that had ever made her feel truly seen. The necklace had been a king's gift, beautiful and formal and chosen with strategy. And she had smiled at it politely, because that was what you did when the king gave you a gift. But the purr, the stupid, involuntary, mortifying purr, that was real. That couldn't be planned or performed or taken back. And she smiled at it like it was the most precious thing in the world because, to her, it was. He had been competing with himself, and the wolf wasn't winning because it was better. It was winning because it was honest. That necklace, Wulfric said, his voice rough, it was the wrong gift. She turned to him, her eyes searching his. It was a lovely gift, Wulfric. It was a lovely gift from a king to his queen, he said. But you are not a queen. You are Wren, and I have been giving gifts to the crown, not to my mate. He saw it then, the crack in her composure, the shine of unshed tears in her eyes. She hadn't asked for this. She hadn't pushed or demanded or explained. She had just smiled and hoped he'd figure it out. And he almost hadn't. He reached out, taking her hand. Her fingers were cold. He wrapped his larger hand around them, warming them. I see you, Wren, he murmured. And he meant it with every fiber of his being. Not the tracker, not the alpha's mate, not the role. Her. The woman who noticed everything and was noticed by no one. The woman his wolf had known from the first second was the only person in the world who mattered. She leaned her head against his shoulder, a silent surrender. The tension that had been a constant hum between them finally eased. It felt like coming home. They stood there for a long time, in comfortable silence, watching the moon rise over the mountains. He wasn't a king. She wasn't an overlooked ward. They were just Wulfric and Wren. Later, without discussing it, they shifted. There was nothing to say that the wolves couldn't say better. In wolf form, there was no performance, no strategy, no crown. Just two wolves, lying side by side in the cool grass of the balcony. The night sky spread above them like a map of everything that didn't need conquering. His massive frame curled around her smaller one, the warmth of her against his ribs, her scent everywhere, lavender and cold rain, and something underneath that was just her, just Wren. The scent he'd know in a room of 10,000. She tucked her nose under his chin. He rested his jaw on her head. A low rumble started in his chest. Not quite a purr, something deeper and older. The vibration of a wolf at rest, with the only creature in the world who mattered. They slept like that, tangled together in the grass beneath the stars. No thoughts, no plans. Just warmth and breath and the steady, ancient rhythm of two hearts deciding to beat in time. Once, in the deep part of the night, she stirred. He felt it instantly, the shift in her breathing, the faint tightening of her muscles. A dream, maybe. Something old and sharp. He pressed closer, curling tighter around her, and the low rumble started in his chest again. That sound, the one that mortified the king and delighted the wolf. In the dark, with no one watching, Wulfric let it come. He purred for her, a deep, steady vibration that said, I'm here. And she settled back against him, her breathing evening out, her nose tucking deeper under his chin. He stayed awake a little longer, watching the stars turn overhead, feeling the impossible weight and lightness of being exactly where he was supposed to be. Morning came soft and gold, and the puddle was still there. Wulfric stood on the balcony looking down at it, a glorious, soupy, unapologetic expanse of mud in the middle of the royal courtyard, a relic of the week's rains. It gleamed in the early light like a challenge, a gauntlet thrown by the universe. A question that had been waiting, patiently, since the first morning his wolf had pointed it out. Wren was beside him, a mug of tea in her hands, her hair still sleep-tousled, a faint streak of dried mud on her cheek from the night before. She followed his gaze to the puddle and said nothing, but through the bond, he felt a flicker of curious attention. And underneath it, barely hidden, a spark of hope so fragile it made his chest ache. His wolf, for once, was quiet, almost reverent. "Do it," it said, and the voice was soft, stripped of its usual bluster. Be the mess. Be the chaos. Be the man she fell in love with. And for the first time, the thought wasn't the wolf's. It was his. He looked at Wren. She looked back at him, her expression open, waiting. Not pushing, not teasing. Just present. Seeing him. He walked down the steps into the courtyard, past the sentries, who straightened as their alpha passed, past a cluster of pack members carrying breakfast from the kitchens, who paused and watched with mild curiosity. He reached the edge of the puddle. It was even better up close. Thick, glooping, perfect. A vintage mud, as his wolf had observed what felt like a lifetime ago. For a moment, he hesitated. The lifetime of training in dignity and decorum screamed in protest. This was insane. This was undignified. This was unbecoming of an alpha king. He shifted. One breath he was a king standing at the edge of a puddle, and the next he was a wolf. Massive, dark-furred, gold-eyed, and looking at that mud with the reverence of a connoisseur approaching a masterwork. He launched himself forward. He didn't wade, he dove. He hit the mud with a spectacular splash that sent arcs of brown water flying across the pristine courtyard stones in every direction, spattering the boots of 2 guards who were too stunned to move. He rolled, letting the cool, thick earth plaster his fur, his ears, his snout. He wallowed. He writhed. He rolled onto his back, paws in the air, wriggling with the abandon of a pup who had never heard the word dignity, and then rolled over and did it again. He submerged himself in glorious, undignified chaos, and a sound came out of him, a bark, a howl, something between the two that was pure, uninhibited joy. A kitchen maid dropped an entire basket of bread. A stable hand climbed onto a fence for a better view. Old Aldrich, crossing the courtyard on his way to breakfast, stopped dead, stared, and turned around to go back to bed, convinced he was still dreaming. From the balcony, he heard it, a sound more beautiful than anything his wolf had ever tried to put into words. A giggle. Small, surprised, escaping before she could catch it. Then another. Then a full, helpless peal of laughter that echoed across the stone courtyard and rang off the keep walls like bells. Wren was leaning against the railing, laughing so hard she could barely stand, one hand pressed over her mouth and the other gripping the stone for support. She laughed until she couldn't breathe, until the laughter turned into tears, and the tears were not sad. They were the sound of something locked and heavy, finally breaking open. The mud-caked wolf trotted out of the puddle, up the courtyard steps, across the pristine hall floor, leaving a trail of muddy paw prints like a declaration of independence, and up the stairs to the balcony. He sat in front of her, tail thumping against the stone, and looked up at her with golden eyes full of hopeful, ridiculous love. She knelt down, still laughing, still crying, and wrapped her arms around his muddy neck. She didn't care. She held him, and he leaned into her, and for a moment they stayed like that, a woman and a wolf, covered in mud, and something more permanent. He shifted back, mud-caked from head to toe, grinning a grin that had never once appeared in a royal portrait. She straightened, framing his filthy face with her clean hands, and the look in her eyes was something he would carry for the rest of his life. "You're a mess," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "I know," he said, his own voice hoarse. Is it a good mess?" "It's the best mess," she replied. And then she kissed him. It wasn't a regal, chaste kiss. It was messy and muddy and perfect. It was a kiss of forgiveness, of acceptance, of two halves finally becoming whole. It tasted of rain and earth and a love big enough to embrace a little chaos. Through the bond, which was wide open and flooded with light and warmth, his wolf sent a single, perfect, triumphant thought, a message for both of them to share. Victory. Wren met his gaze, her eyes shining with tears and laughter. She nodded, a small, jerky movement. Victory, she sent back, her thought a wave of pure, unconditional love. A month later, the Royal Council was once again in session. The mood was considerably lighter, due in part to the season's strong harvest, in part to the successful integration of 3 formerly packless wolves into the Eastern Patrol. Darcy had turned out to be a formidable scout in her own right, and in part to the fact that their alpha king had, against all odds, become approximately 15% less terrifying to be around. The pack had taken to calling the phenomenon, in hushed and affectionate tones, the mud incident. No one dared say it to Wulfric's face. Marcus had tried once and been assigned night patrol for a week. Wulfric sat at the head of the table, listening intently as his agricultural minister gave a lengthy report on grain yields. He was every inch the king, his posture erect, his expression serious. Almost. If one looked closely, one could see the corner of his mouth twitching. And there was a small dried fleck of mud behind his left ear that he'd refused to let anyone wash off. Wren sat in her customary chair, a book in her lap, though she wasn't reading. She was listening to the familiar, chaotic symphony in her husband's head. Grain. So much talk of grain, his wolf lamented dramatically. It is yellow and boring. Wren's hair is not boring. It is the color of a sunset trapped in silk. Perhaps we should lick her cheek as a sign of our continued devotion and to relieve the tedium of this cereal-based discussion. Wulfric took a slow, deep breath. He did not look at Wren. He kept his eyes fixed on the minister. No, he said, his voice quiet but firm, cutting through the drone of harvest statistics. The minister stopped, confused. No, my lord. Wulfric cleared his throat, his composure flawless. No, he repeated, his gaze unwavering. We are not going to lick her cheek. She is trying to work. A beat of profound, confused silence filled the chamber. The minister stared, his mouth slightly agape. The elders exchanged baffled looks. Beside Wulfric, Marcus Thorne, who had just been taking a sip of water, choked, spraying a fine mist across the ancient table. He dropped his head into his hands, his shoulders shaking with silent, agonized laughter. Wren looked down at her book, a slow, happy smile spreading across her face. The king was in his castle. The wolf was in his head. And the man, the whole, wonderful, gloriously messy man, was finally home.